coming to this pre-forum. We have had many terrific people lead deals at Golden Seeds, and we also have a number of new members who we would just love to jump in and get involved with leading deals. So we thought what we would do is that pick a few people who have been very involved, particularly in leading deals in the last year or so. And Jo Ann has agreed to lead a discussion with them. And Jo Ann, I will let you introduce your very esteemed panel. And I'm going to hand this to him.
Okay, so first of all, how many people in this room have led a deal? Okay, so that's Tim. You put your hand up, you've led a deal. So that's actually great. And the thing is that we have a lot of people in the network who haven't led a deal. And in fact, we have a lot of people who haven't even worked on a deal team yet. And leading a deal is, being on a deal team, leading a deal is really part of the secret sauce of being in an angel group. Investing in early stage companies, in my opinion, is a team sport. And the way that you invest, you need a lot of expertise around you, so we want to make sure that we get everybody on the team. I think it's very intimidating the first time you put your hand up to lead a deal, so we want to try to demystify that a little bit. So we have these three amazing women, and between them, among them, they have led deals that, with Golden Seeds and the other syndication partners, they've led deals that have raised collectively over $10 million. So that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And I guess I want to start off by asking, what was it that made you put your hand up that first time and lead a deal? And to introduce yourself, the first time you answer a question, could you just give a little 30-second thought? So, who wants to talk about how they put their hand up the first time? Why don't you start, Vicki? Because Vicki's led hat size, 3 rounds of bespoke global, and she also was co-lead on Wisegate, which we would have tried to co-lead, but we got squeezed out, plus other deals.
So there's a short answer as to why I led a deal in the first place, and that was because Peggy and Joan said, you should do this, which is probably what will come to you if you haven't led one already. But so the reason I've led deals since then is because 2 reasons. One, if I see an entrepreneur that I think is amazing, and of course the more you see, the more you can identify one that really is amazing. I think being an entrepreneur is incredibly hard, so I want to do everything I can to help that person that I think has a lot of potential. So that's, once I see someone that I want to back, I really want to get involved and help them all I can. So that's one reason. And the other reason is because I just want it to learn things. You have to put yourself out there. You have to take risks, and the more scary the risk, the more you learn. So that's what I do. I try to learn as much as possible. I think that being in an angel network, one of the skills is that no one knows very much about any deal. We have this enormous pipeline of deals that come in. No one can be an expert on any of those things. So the only thing to do is to know who is the expert and get hold of those people. It doesn't have to be the expert. I mean, there will be some experts on the sector, but there are also, of course, financial experts and exit experts and all kinds of others who you can call on. And in order to know what that network looks like, you have to be in it, and you have to have worked in it.
So, Vicki, can you just give people 30 seconds on your background before you...
So, there's my background, which was working at Bain & Company for a few years, working as a sales and marketing person for software companies with large packages on Wall Street, and then non-profit work. That's the sort of formal side that I would tell you about. But as all those people who think they aren't qualified to be a deal lead, I had been basically out of the working workforce for 20 years. I had founded a couple of non-profits and run one non-profit for about 7 or 8 years. They're both still going and successful. But I've never been in the financial industry. I have been in management consulting. So I was really unqualified to be a deal leader, just so you know. But the thing is that, there are plenty of people around who can help. And they're really, really good and have a lot of experience, and you just need to know who they are and rope them in. And one of the key things also is with sector knowledge, the people who have the sector knowledge are sometimes, very often, the people who are not going to invest in the deal because they're bored with that sector. And they, and also they may not see the opportunity, in fact, because they've spent so much time there already. But you still need them because they'll give you the pitfalls. So somehow you have to get those people involved and yet not have them perhaps overwhelm the deal, which may still be very interesting. So that's an interesting aspect of leading.
So Gail Hoffman is part of the leadership Boston Forum. So Gail, how did you end up leading the deal?
I think you're going to see a real theme here. The first deal that I agreed to co-lead was, again, I didn't really put my hand up. My hand was raised for me by Cheryl Schultz in Boston, who said, you should do this. You like this company. And so I felt like she actually raised my hand, but was willing to co-lead the deal with me since it was my first time. That deal, ultimately, we ended up killing, which was one of the hardest things that I've had to do with Golden Seeds, because we had grown very fond of the entrepreneur, and it wasn't because of her that we killed it. It was because of some qualities of hers that we killed it, but we really believed in the business and the opportunity. I feel like in Boston, it's been a series of sort of raise your hand halfway and people push it up the full way, which is now why I'm running the Boston office with a lot of help. But again, Group Eyes, which is the deal that we did fund back this summer with $2 million, I met the entrepreneurs at our open office hours. A husband and wife team who came in, sat down with me, and after half an hour, I was ready to write a personal check. But they needed a lot more money than my $25,000 or whatever I was going to do with my personal check. And again, similar to Vicki, I thought the two of them were amazing. I wanted to help them. They desperately needed the money. They had put in so much of their own money as well as their time, their life, and I wanted to help make this happen for them. The rewards from doing this have been phenomenal. Getting to be on the phone with the entrepreneur when a 2-year deal that they've been working on closed. I got a treat out of that. I didn't work on this for 2 years, but I got to be on the phone when it actually happened. So it also opened up the whole network to me, because in Boston we often feel like we're up there working on our own, but I got to know people very well in New York, in Silicon Valley, in now Texas, not Dallas, by pulling all the deal people in from different offices. I feel like I now know very well people everywhere. And again, going to Vicki's point, my background was in investment banking and venture capital. I stopped for 15 years, had 4 kids, and so again, could I really lead this deal? It's very different than the private equity world I was in. There are so many experts within the Golden Seeds network, and I was able to pull in a lawyer to review all the contracts. Deb Bronstein-Culp was an amazing person doing our exit strategy analysis. So every single person that you need on the team is within the Golden Seeds network, and if it's not, people will try to help find it. And Jo Ann introduced me at the January party to who we needed for our software, because she really knows everyone throughout the network and was able to pull these people in.
So, and Emily just led the reopen of the Raft media deal, and before that she led a deal called Shareably, which was a company that you met at open office hours, followed for a while. They came back in to screen again, and right out of screening, a group of members did a little due diligence, a short due diligence, wrote a deal memo, and invested in her note right before it closed. So tell me how you got involved.
Well, I think you're going to hear a lot of the same things that you've already heard from Vicki and Gail, so either I'm just shameless imitator or there's some actual thread here that's very true. I think that's exactly right. as Jo Ann says, I met this person in open office hours. I thought she was amazing. I thought that I liked her business too, but I also saw something in terms of the combination of domain knowledge, drive, confidence that was in no way complacent or arrogant, and just a tremendous energy, and doing something that I believe was commercially very relevant, certainly. And it really happened very organically. You asked the question of what made you raise your hand. I didn't so much as raise my hand as it just sort of all came together for us very quickly. I wanted to be an advocate for this person. I believed in her and in what she was doing. I got a bunch of people to listen to her. They said, she should come back to screening. And out of screening, we literally sat down on the 6th floor and, mapped out a plan that allowed us to. There was already a term sheet. It was a different kind of a situation, but it did really come about very, very organically. And I guess we were talking earlier. I think part of what I think about leading a deal is that part of the role is to be the advocate, not a blind salesperson necessarily, but to be an advocate for the business and for the entrepreneur, even when being an advocate, of course, involves asking questions. So that's how that happened, and it was great because, as these folks have also indicated, we had a dozen very good people who quickly, get aligned on this, and clearly the quality of our discussion and the kinds of thinking that we were able to do was far exceeded certainly what I would have done on my own.
And Emily, what's your professional background?
So my professional background was always in technology businesses, both in large-scale enterprise IT and in product and service development, across several industries, mostly financial services, media and entertainment, consumer electronics, and telecom. But in terms of, I think I'm the newbie here. I've been a member of Golden Seeds for just exactly a year and a half. And my experience with this kind of deal making was really in a corporate setting where I was responsible for minority investments or small transactions. But certainly it's very different when it's your money.
Yeah, definitely is. I wanted to just, on the deals that you guys have worked on, so, yes, that some of them closed, but I know it's not a smooth road, so, can you, Gail, tell me, how did you dealing with, say, Charles and Elisa on negotiating terms that were more investor versus entrepreneur friendly? How did that work? How did you feel about it? How did it make it happen?
And there were definite ups and downs going throughout when I originally met them in November, and then we closed in June. One of the biggest actually helps to me was Jo Ann. And understanding.
I asked the question.
Understanding within the term sheets and the different things that we were negotiating, exactly where I did have flexibility, where I didn't have flexibility, what was critical from the fund standpoint as well as from our standpoint, so that I had a landscape of knowing, okay, from our standpoint, where are we? Also understanding from Charles and Elisa's standpoint, what was their history? Because all of these entrepreneurs come with history. They had been in a venture-backed company before and had a lot of fears because of that. And being able to understand what their fears were and why they had them and how we could then give on some of those points to make them happy and comfortable that this was not going to be the same experience that they had had, made it much easier to negotiate the side that we needed. At the end, we thought the deal at one point was going to be dead, and we gave them a term sheet that had a very short timeline because he was negotiating with venture capitalists. He was going out to the West Coast And we wanted our deal to expire before he went on that trip. I thought our deal was dead at that point because there were many venture capitalists that were interested at a higher valuation. I continued the conversation the whole week he was out there. So we spent every day on the phone talking about the differences between an angel-backed deal and a venture-backed deal. And so it was that continual conversation that helped us get through the bumps in the road, and there were many.
So, general bumps or terms in specifically?
You can ask, I'm sure there are more than term bumps.
All right, well, here's my first bump. I became the deal lead on the hat size deal, which is very obscure technology, data center technology. So it was very difficult for people to get to grips with it initially. And also the deal was in Canada. So I think the very first meeting that we had on the phone, afterwards, David Beatty said, he said, well, that was a namby-pamby meeting, or something, maybe a little more Irish than that. That's not going to work. So that's when I kind of realized that one had to be a little bit less kind of...
I don't think anyone's ever used namby.
So, but, you learn about how to lead these things. Essentially, people had a rather flabby view of what the technology did, and also because the company was so far away, we didn't really have a sort of immediate presence. So we had to develop this drive and this ongoing learning process about the company and about the technology that kind of pushed us through the next 6 months. So, in terms of negotiating deals, which sometimes I guess people are worried they're going to have to do, I actually have always had central, and very experienced people as part of the team, and so I haven't personally negotiated many terms. I've been on the edges and sort of prepared the ground, but you always have Jo Ann or Peggy or many others who I just happen not to have worked with who can help you with that if that's something that feels like a hurdle.
Emily, you worked on RAP, which was oversubscribed. So were there any problems with that deal?
Well, that's a really, what they call a high-quality problem to have. I think that, and in terms of, in both cases, I can give you my perspective just as an observer. In these two things, the terms were the terms. So I was not involved in those discussions, although I think that the thing that's true in any negotiation is understanding, not what people are saying, but what they're trying to accomplish. So sometimes, for example, when we had questions about the terms on the shareholder term sheet, it was more a matter of understanding once we were clear about what our objective was, it was funny how the problem went away. Because there are always ways to solve those things when you don't get hung up on a demand as opposed to, but we want to have these kinds of rights and that sort of thing. I think that, one thing I'm hoping as we move to the new system that we have better mechanisms for figuring out where folks are beyond, individual calls and emails and stuff are always going to happen and are extremely important. I'm not suggesting for a minute that you can take a leadership role in, what is after all a democracy, and democracy is ugly. You gotta be prepared to communicate with people, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that requirement would ever go away. But I think that for the deal lead, having visibility into what's happening and where people are at is really helpful, and it's also not just to make your life easier, but ultimately it's part of what you want to do in support of the entrepreneur, because the better information you can give her, the better decisions she can make about other funding. People are talking to lots of people in the question, and we've seen it from these other examples. Sometimes it goes the wrong way for us when other people are able to move more quickly. So I think that's certainly an important thing. And you know, I think just the other thing is generally the nature of, you know, you want, anytime you're doing something in a team, right, more communication is always better. And I think that, you know, that's just generally important. And finding those pockets of expertise that you need is helpful.
So, you know, one of the things that I think stops people from putting their hand up to lead a deal is that they think they're going to have to do everything. And I, you know, the first deal I ever led was Cognition Therapeutics with NADA. And if you know me, I know zero about science. I mean, zero. So the concept that was the first deal I led was interesting to me. But I didn't do everything, and NADA didn't do everything. We had a team, and so, you know, how did it work out for you in terms of how much did you do? How did you allocate the responsibilities? How much of the deal memo did you write? That seems to freak people out, that they might have to write the deal memo.
I'll start. It is a lot of work to lead a deal. I think the predominant responsibility is communication and pulling people in and getting people to understand what they're responsible for and deadlines. But that doesn't mean you doing everything. In the middle of the group-eyes deal, I was put on a murder trial for 5 weeks. And so...
Wasn't somebody on the team?
It was not someone on the team. But it fell in the middle of our first all-day deep dive. It was after the deep dive. It was now, okay, we're moving forward. I've scheduled a whole day to be at the company with a bunch of different people on the deal, and now I can't show up. So, one, having a co-lead, I think, is critical, particularly for a large deal, because there are going to be times in each of our lives that something comes up, and that's inevitable. So I would not recommend doing this alone unless it's a small deal, someone else's term sheet, and I don't know, I still might not do it alone. But really keeping everyone on track and making sure everyone understands what their responsibilities are, and you continue that weekly call and check on everyone. It feels a little bit sometimes like, you know, being the teacher, the babysitter, a lot of, you know, but it's critical because everyone has got their own lives and doing a million other things, and if you're not on everyone with very clear communication, it falls apart and it loses momentum. And then another forum happens and people move on and get interested in the next deal. So that's the hardest part.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically maintaining momentum is the key. And also maintaining very good communications. Everybody who is interested in the deal might be. Just knowing all about that all the time. I mean, how much work you do on it depends on every deal and every team and what you choose to do. I think on Hat Size I probably wrote about 10% of the deal memo, but I did a lot of editing with Joan. We edited line by line, but a lot of other people contributed. With Wisegate, we didn't write any of it because the deal was already mostly written by another angel group, so it was much more about coordinating with the other angel groups because it was going to be oversubscribed, and there was a lot of kind of to and fro and kind of getting the information from the other angel groups, figuring out how much room there was for us, and those kinds of things. With Bespoke Global, I think I wrote about 60% of the deal memo, maybe even more, and of course done it a few times now. So it just varies, you know, whatever you are good at, you do, and everything else you farm out, and the trick is to just make sure that you can get back the results and that you keep people understand what they have to do, that it's a finite task that they have, and that they're very clear about when it needs to be done.
Yeah, that's actually when you're dealing with it's a volunteer organization, is being really clear about, I want, you know, you have volunteered to do this. This is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, this is the timeline. And circumscribing those pieces, I think, is the deal lead. That's a really important thing. And Emily, you have your microphone.
Yeah, I'm glad that Gail and Vicki used the word momentum, because it does seem to me, just both as an investor and someone who's had a little bit of leadership experience now, that is always our #1 challenge. And I think it's the nature of any filmmaking in any context. But I think that is the challenge. In terms of my experience, I would have to agree with Vicki. I think it depends entirely on the nature of the deal, the nature of the team, the timing. When we did Shareably, people put their hands up right away to do different pieces. I think the day after we met with the entrepreneur, Ted and Sam went and interviewed the tech lead. And you know, it all just happened very quickly. I did all the writing for the very brief memo that resulted, and I do stress very brief. In the case of Wrapped, I'm looking at Tracy. It was like archaeology. We had about 4 different iterations of documents, some of which were very up to date and some not so much. And some was new material that had to be incorporated, some was other material, and then it needed a kind of a consistent voice. So there was actually a fair amount of writing, and certainly a great deal of editing that happened through that most recent process. But I don't think that one's very typical, because it was really, it really represented the culmination of probably 1.5 years worth total of diligence.
Can I add something? We may have the award within Golden Seeds for Group Eyes of writing the longest deal memo, which, you know, just the deal memo was probably 60 pages, but with the appendix was probably 140 pages. I probably wrote about 20% of that. Part of that is my background, but part of it is knowing that we were going to have to syndicate. And having that deal memo, we raised 1.2 of the $2 million in-house. The rest of it, first of all, was oversubscribed, and with that deal memo, everyone else that we showed it to didn't want to do one other piece of work. So it was a nightmare to actually pull the deal memo together, probably my least favorite part of doing the deal, but it made raising that amount of money in such a quick time incredibly easy.
Yeah, Group Eyes was an amazingly easy close. There was a first close on June 7th, for like $1.2 million or $1.3 million or something, and then a month later, the rest of the deal was closed, and it was just an open and shut case. Most of them don't go that way. So I wanted to ask if you guys have taken our Knowledge Institute courses, 201 and 301 and 401 in particular, and did 201 and 301 help you or make you feel more confident about doing the deal?
I had taken one about the term sheets, and I took a couple way back in 2009, which may have been included deal leading, but I don't actually specifically remember doing one on that. I think I was a deal lead before, before we had that course.
This is where I want to drop into the floor. Actually, I should have taken art courses.
You're going to. I can leave and you can really.
Well, I can tell you the term sheet one was terrific.
I had actually, the first time I tried to lead a deal, I had not taken any of the courses and really had no idea what I was doing. And luckily Cheryl was, you know, beside me, sort of teaching me. Before leading Group Eyes, I took all 4 of the courses. And I would say they were tremendous help and probably got me halfway there. I don't think you get all the way there without actually leading a deal. Because the reality of what actually happens, you can't teach. There's only so far you can go, but it made me feel a lot more comfortable of knowing what's the Golden Seeds way, because I had learned it in a private equity world that was completely different. So it was very helpful.
I just wanted to, I was interested by your kind of talking about using the deal memo in syndication, because I have done quite a lot of syndicating to both other angel groups and to individuals. And the deal memo is incredibly useful because, of course, it is a compendium of everything that's been done, and people are delighted to have that. But the important thing is not to believe that that is a selling document. you have to have the entrepreneur go to those people who are looking at the, or speak to them on the phone at worst. It can't go, the deal memo cannot go ahead of time. I mean, we you know, sometimes I think we forget this, and in my experience, if you send the deal memo ahead of time, you've just lost your contact actually with the, you know, with the potential syndication partner.
Yeah, I agree with that, because people invest in these deals because they believe in the entrepreneur. So that's, you have to lead with that. Yeah, and the deal memo helps you close it. So this is actually one of the questions that I wrote down, because I find this part to be, you know, working on a deal team, when you're syndicating the deal, even when you're syndicating it internally, balancing the, quote, selling the deal with your position as an objective investor and, you know, person on the team. I think that's hard, and I'm curious about your experience on how did you balance that?
I think it's very hard to do. You spend so much time with these entrepreneurs and with the company and want this to be successful. A couple of things that I did to make sure that I wasn't going into selling mode. First, in the deal memo, we had about 60 outside calls that we made amongst the team. I included a synopsis of each, not even a synopsis, almost all of that written up, so that people in the appendix, if they had any questions, so that I didn't want bias showing up in the deal memo, they could actually read what those interviews were and make their own decision. The second part I did when writing the positives and negatives about the deal, I didn't want it to be just my positives and negatives. Clearly that was my responsibility as the deal lead, was to write that section. But I asked all of our deal members to give me what they thought the positives and negatives were of the deal, so that I made sure I wasn't just giving my opinion, because this was we had a large deal team that was working on this, and I wanted to make sure that their thoughts were very well represented. So.
Yeah, I agree. You have to get people to contribute their negatives as well as the positive. I mean, I think you just can't get away from the idea that you're selling. If you're there, you're selling. You know, so you can say you're impartial, but you're not. You know, so there's no way to. I think you can't have the view that you're somehow an impartial person. The best you can do is provide opportunities for people to see other points of view, and of course to draw their own conclusions from talking directly to the team members.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that, and I think to give people the foundation for why you think what you think, and that's what that's what the memo is supposed to do, is to explain the rationale behind your thinking. But I use the word advocate, and I think it's naive and for anyone to think that, you know, if you're in a leadership position on a deal, you're not invested in it in the bigger sense. Of course you are.
It's also, my own feeling is that you're working on a deal and it's not your money. So you're communicating the intentions of a lot of individuals, and you're trying to communicate with the entrepreneur, and you can never say, we're going to invest X million, you know, X hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can only say, I have this many people in the deal room, this many people are hard circle, this many. And so when deal leads are calling you up and trying to get you to make a commitment, part of that is that they're on the other side trying to figure out how to talk to the entrepreneur about how much money we have, because it's this, you know, chicken and egg thing about trying to move the deal forward. So I do find that one of the trickier aspects of being a deal lead.
I think another problematic moment might be if you're not sure if you're going to invest yourself personally. I think it's possible for someone to be a deal lead who isn't planning to invest in a deal, but it is tricky. I think you have to state it early on with your investors. I mean, it's not so easy, and you know, perhaps people have to, you know, You know, people have to do it from time to time if it just isn't somebody else and they like it and they've run out of money, they've spent all their money for that year or something. But it's difficult because people expect you. You know, if you're there, then you're obviously implicitly backing this deal, and if you then aren't putting money in, it's problematic.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I wanted to open it up to questions now that Mindy has her hand up.
She's such a patsy.
So I wonder if you each could talk about how you syndicated within the network. So Boston to New York, to West Coast, New York, Dallas. I mean, one of those things is just getting the momentum, not only here, but keeping, trying to get people in other regions to participate. Maybe talk about that.
Sure, I'll start. Coming from Boston, it's first of all critical for a $2 million deal that we have more than Boston involved. So it's not a choice for us. The timing of the deal actually was very fortunate. I met them in November. We had them at our forum in January because we didn't have a forum in December, so it gave me time to work with them. Luckily, right after that, we had our Innovation Summit. And I took it upon myself at the Innovation Summit that my job was to meet as many New Yorkers, find out what their backgrounds were, and pull people into the deal. Jo Ann helped with that. We needed someone who really understood technology and software. She immediately told me told me I would thank her later, and I do thank her now. And so it was my job to start figuring out, since everyone was in, who in Texas might be interested, who in California. And so I spent that Innovation Summit talking about group buys. And it would have been very difficult had that not happened, being up in Boston. But I continued that. And immediately after we had our deep dive in Boston, where every person at the table wanted to go forward, where I've never been in a deep dive like that. We might have 3/4, we might have, a fifth. I really started getting on with Jo Ann, also trying to get it scheduled to come down here because that was critical. I came down with group buys, as did Peter, my co-lead, because we had to support this deal. And again, while we were here, I pulled in Ginevra for the legal side, so it was this constant, okay, who do we need? We don't have that in Boston, I want to pull in, and so we kept Deb Bronstein, Nicole Bronstein also pulled her, and so it was this continual process of pulling people in from other networks.
So I think the thing to bear in mind in dealing with the different chapters is that they do have kind of a group dynamic, and you just never know what's going to appeal. You just never know, and so you can't. You just go like you do to any other angel group, and you talk about whatever it is, and then maybe there'll be an upswelling from some member or group of members, and maybe there won't. And that's just the way it is. We're kind of, I think, far flung, for example, from San Francisco. So it's difficult to have kind of anecdotal meetings like we do in New York with our New York entrepreneurs. I mean, we can have bespoke come in any day of the week, and people can eyeball them, people can ask them questions, and it's pretty easy. People can assess on their own quite straightforwardly. But it's much harder with, let's say, California. So when I've been as far as possible with the groups that we've been syndicating within our own unit. So I've been to the other forums pretty much every time. But there'll usually be just a few who like it and who go in the deal in the ones that I've dealt with.
Well, and I mean, when you remember, there's 20 and 30 members in some of these chapters, so if you get a few, it's probably the same percentage. The thing that I have realized is trying to get people on a deal team right out of the chute. So, we're trying to have a deal director on deep dives in Boston and Silicon Valley so that we see what the deal's all about, so that we can try to then seed it with people who can help the deal team from the other areas. I'd say it's a working process.
One thing, though, one kind of side benefit of going to all these other forums has been that I do know much more about the sources of expertise in the other forums. And people have helped out even on deals where they were not going to invest, where they never met the entrepreneurs. I've had several in California who've helped me on deals where they had sector expertise, but they weren't going to invest. They didn't really, it was too close to home. They'd already done that, seen that, whatever. And I guess my feeling about that is, if somebody helps me like that, then they can be sure that if they need any help from me later, they're going to get it. Whatever it is. I'm probably not going to be able to provide with any sector expertise. But if I can point them to the right person, or I can pull in an expert from my own network, I'll do it.
One of the things we also changed in Boston is we now, at our forum every month, hold one of our slots for the best deal out in the rest of the network, non-Boston, because first of all, we want to make sure our members are seeing the best deals that Golden Seeds has, not the best deals that are in New England. But we want to make sure that people are coming. And so we have that every month. And now people who have deals in the works call us and say, we'd like to come. So that's something that Jo Ann works very closely with us, helping figure out who that company is going to be.
A comment that I'd like to add to the process if you're leading a deal that's going into another chapter. I think it's probably a good idea not only to accompany the entrepreneur, but probably also to write just a couple of sentences, introduction, about what it is that the deal team sees in the deal, so that and to send that out ahead of time, or to somehow prime the group, because as you say, the different chapters do have totally different sort of outlooks on things, but it's interesting to me because I saw it with RAPT actually both times, and I feel that we failed to support them in Boston both times. A deal that was oversubscribed in New York didn't get a single vote of interest in Boston, and I think there are many things that we failed to do to set that up. So I just think it's something that we can all think about how to do this.
Other questions? Barbara?
So I'm Leslie Beals also, and was just wondering if you all have a sense of what do you think is critical mass, or how many people do you think you want to have on a deal team, so you're not writing the whole deal, not including yourself, even assuming a co-lead, to really keep it moving along and make sure that everything's covered. What's the minimum? What do you think?
Well, it depends. I mean, with Bespoke, initially, we had two. Me and Jo Ann. So the first deal memo was literally between the two of us. On hat size, it was probably 5. That was a little more complex because we had all the sort of Canadian aspect, the tax aspect, as well as cross-border, this and that, and the technology. We hired a consultant to evaluate the technology. I don't know if anyone else has done that here, but I think that's the only deal where we've actually hired an outside specialist for a modest amount of money to go in and actually evaluate the software. But of course, if you really need to know if the software is solid, then you can do that. So I don't know if there's critical mass, but probably not a whole lot more than like 5, because I think the extras usually, I mean, perhaps they can do sort of a standalone kinds of analysis, like checking references, where it's very standalone. Then you can have more people, and of course they can do a fantastic job. Where everything's interrelated, you kind of need a core group that's in touch with each other a bit more extensively.
But going back to the issue of generating support and momentum throughout the network, I wonder if now, and again, this is from the perspective of someone who's relatively new, given the size of the organization, it would be hard to be successful with a team that was smaller than, say, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's very precise. Because of that, I'll use the word network effect, that you have more people out there talking about what's going on and serving to introduce other people to the deal, and that's how you get the support. it's not even so much about getting the work done and having the diversity of opinion and having the diversity of expertise, all of which are really great. But I think it's just better in terms of the advocacy process and the socializing process, both locally and across. Tracy stepped up, but I agree strongly with her point that we failed by not accompanying the entrepreneur to Boston for RACT. So I do think that there's a value about the size that has to do with momentum and institutionalizing as opposed to just getting the work done.
Right, I suppose I distinguish between writing and being part of the phone call. So writing it takes it's generally slightly
more than a certain number of people.
But somehow or other you have to be able to tell the story, have the story pay out over the period of due diligence for everyone to the extent that they need that. I mean, very few people simply read down the deal memo and say, I'm in or I'm out. I mean, they'll say they're not in because they're not invested in it. So somehow or other you have to have a process. It may not be actually making people write things into the deal memo, but there's certainly a process where people become familiar with the entrepreneurs and the deal, and they see a process, a story unfolding.
Yeah, so on the scheduling periodic calls where you try to get everybody who's in the deal room to come onto the call, even though you're not asking them to do any work, just so they can follow along with how the deal's developing. That's my view.
From my standpoint, each of the people who are on the deal team are advocates as well. And if it's a larger deal and a complicated deal, the more members you need. We had 12 people on the group-wise deal team who each contributed in writing, but it was a complicated deal with a complicated product in a very large industry. So there was a lot of work to be done. And it's a trade-off, because the more people you have on the deal team, the more you're a coordinator. And so you spend a lot of time coordinating and writing a deal memo or pulling one together when some people are using Macs and other people are using PCs and getting all paginated. I gotta tell you, Peter and I spent a weekend, literally a whole weekend, pulling that together and making sure that people weren't repeating, and so it's a trade-off. At times we thought, Jesus, this would have been easier if we'd just written the whole thing. But again, we now had 12 people out in Texas, here, New York, who were also talking about it and getting other investors pulled in.
One of the things I try to do, both from the point of view of saving the entrepreneur time, but also because it actually adds to the experience of the investors, is to try to coordinate group meetings, as large groups as possible, both for our own investors and for syndication partners. I mean, on the one hand, you might say, well, if one syndication partner has a very negative view, it might spill over to the other teams. But mostly, having big group meetings means that everyone gets much more out of it. So that's what I try to do. And of course, the entrepreneur has to spend fewer hours, with groups.
David, you had a question?
Gail, early on, you were telling a story about how you explained to an entrepreneur the difference between an angel term sheet and a venture capital term sheet. What did you say? Are there generic differences that are pretty standard?
Yes, there are in terms of ultimate control of the business and certain details about what a VC is going to ask for or what an angel is going to ask for. But most of it comes down to control. With what we did, you're going to get a third of the company, which is pretty standard in the type of round that we were doing, where a VC coming in was going to demand much more in terms of security of job, etc. And clearly we have the right to kick out the entrepreneurs if we need to, but not the same as what a VC would ask for. And Jo Ann was very helpful in educating me about the difference between the two. And Charles and I spent actually one drive that I had to go to visit my daughter at college for 2 hours talking about why it made more sense, particularly given his history, to go with an angel group.
So the biggest differences we see is that the VCs generally control the boards completely, and angel term sheets tend to be much a balanced board. investors equal to management representatives and then an independent. So that's the biggest difference.
Carol, you had a question?
It was sort of an observation, I think, more than a question, which is, I tend to observe a lot of deals, because if there's a glimmer of interest or something that piqued my fancy, I tend to put myself on as an observer. And what I notice with the deals that I ultimately invest in, having started as an observer, is that the deal lead keeps communication that is substance in the emails that come through the deal. So it's not just, we're having a meeting on Monday at 2 p.m. It's, here are the open questions, here's what we've learned, here's why we're excited, here's some, so you really are being kept up to date with what's being learned, even when you're not on the phone calls. And then as a result of those updates, my interest is either sort of going up or my interest might be going down, but it's helping me stay tuned to, is this something I'm ultimately going to invest in or not?
That's a really good comment. That communicating through the deal room.
I just would like to ask, maybe Jo Ann, you could lead with this, is the role of the deal director and how the deal leads interact with the deal director on these deals. Maybe define what a deal director is.
So it's interesting you should say that, because I read the deal director paperwork last night, just in case somebody asked me that question. So the thing about the deal director is, generally the deal director is somebody who's going to help the deal lead make sure that on terms, on cap tables, and on the elements of the deal memo, and also just making sure that it's all, covered, not necessarily doing it, and also helping them try to find the right people in the network. The more experienced the members of the team, I would say the less work the deal director does. The other thing that the deal directors do is, because the deal directors tend to be people who right now, all the deal directors, I think, are members of, are on the fund's investment committee. They're the link to the fund, and that's really important. Even if the fund's not going to invest, we still need somebody who is seeing all the deal flow, communicating with the funds.
Sandy?
Deals have a tendency of taking on a certain degree of positive momentum. People who work on deal teams are enthusiastic about it and whatever. And one of the struggles I've had as a deal lead, and I'd be interested in the experience of others, is how do you make sure that in the wake of that enthusiasm, the things about the deal that are potentially deal breakers get effectively reflected and dealt with and don't get sort of shoved under the table?
That's the hardest question, so who wants to take a crack at that?
I'll start. Part of that, actually, for the deal that I led, Jo Ann was critical. There were a number of issues, particularly for the fund and whether the fund would invest, that were, they wouldn't be able to unless we dealt with them. And so it was an enormous incentive to keep those front and center, because we needed or wanted the fund to be able to come in. And so that was the biggest piece, at least for this particular deal.
I think I'm just thinking about one thing that happened on hat size, for example. And the hat size deal lasted for many, many months, quite unusually, but from about March to about the end of November. And the problem with that was that it's very hard to maintain momentum. First of all, you gather all the financials and you do all that work and you come up with a partial deal memo at least. But then 3 months goes by and you have a whole new set of financials and a whole new history that you have to keep adding to deal memo. So it was a lot of work and difficult to decide, how much we had to keep updating. And one thing that happened was that the company did lose one of their big clients during that process. And it was a question at the time as to how much to make of that. You know, of course we told the people who were interested in the deal, but you know what I mean, if you sort of send out a headline saying, you know, Hat's Eyes lost one of its, 5 big clients, that might have killed it completely. So it was, I don't have an answer at all. It's just that I think the way we dealt with it, or the way I dealt with it, was to speak personally to many people in the deal and let them ask me questions, and or let them talk to the CEO. We would give them opportunities to ask whatever they felt about that slightly negative happenstance.
So, Emily, if you have anything to add, I also wanted to talk about the yoga and how the deal team started to lose confidence in the entrepreneur, and that's ultimately what killed the deal. That's sort of, why don't you talk about that a little bit, because you love the entrepreneur, but these things started to creep in.
So Yogurt is a deal that was several years ago. It was and still is, a probiotic frozen yogurt dog treat, health treat. And this was the first deal, as I said, that I was working on with Cheryl Schultz. We had a couple other people on the deal team. Love the entrepreneur. She is an amazing woman, had put in close to $1 million of her own money into this business. Clearly committed. They were in Petco. They had national distribution. I mean, it was a wonderful deal. Cheryl and I went up for the day to meet the team, the rest of the team, who we had met briefly, but this was our, we've done all the work, we love it. We're going up to really dig into marketing, etc.
I was going to do that deal too.
Spent an enormous amount of time with the marketing, her new hire, marketing director, and her new hire, who was the previous CFO of Keurig. Seemed like had great credentials. These hires told us that she didn't know how to actually build a team. And Cheryl and I were devastated. I mean, we thought this company was terrific. We loved the product, we loved the entrepreneur. But she hired friends, and her COO was a friend, and didn't hire competent people. And so we ended up having to kill it. And it was the hardest phone call that we've had to make, and that I've had to make, telling this entrepreneur, who I thought the world of, that we couldn't go forward because of her judgment.
Although it was completely obvious from the presentation that these people made, I mean, even to me, and I wasn't even close to the deal, that they were terrible hires. So.
Yeah. Yes.
What happened to the company?
The company, believe it or not, is still bumping along, and she continues to fund it. This woman has a separate business that has done very well, and she's been funding it. They were close to getting an acquisition offer, but pretty much buying her out, and they turned it down. So it's still in Petco, it's bumping along, and she's funding it.
There is that risk, isn't there? I mean, because part of what we respond to in people is a certain level of charisma, and sometimes you find out, hopefully before you get too far, that there's not a lot behind it.
I just wanted to add something to Cindy's comment about whether issues can kind of get swept under the rug or are not addressed in a timely way. One of the things that I have really admired about a lot of teams that are and deals that I feel have been led well, is the sense that the deal leads, often with the help of the deal director, have about when to bring up certain issues that really need to be addressed and dealt with without waiting too long. Doesn't mean you do it in the first 10 minutes or the first week or even 2 weeks, because you need to resolve things. But it's utterly unfair to the entrepreneur if you keep a deal going for too many weeks or months sometimes, and then it doesn't work, and you sometimes can say, gosh, we could have done this a month ago, or could have dealt with that. So I think the sense of timing is when is the right moment to have certain conversations and deal with
certain issues is really critical, and I think that's kind of a gift that deal leads and deal members, team members develop over time about what's the moment to have certain conversations.
One of the great lessons I learned going through Group Eyes, and I think in part one of the changes at Golden Seeds because of what happened, if you're going to need the fund to come in because it's a larger raise or a hope that the fund is going to come in, having the deal director at that deep dive meeting, because they might have different issues that are deal killers than we do as individual angels. And I learned that, but I learned that lesson late. It definitely had an impact on the entrepreneur at the time, and I felt badly that this issue was raised so late in the course. It all was resolved beautifully with a lot of help from a lot of people, but that issue should have been at our deep dive, or quickly thereafter, because that was a go or no go. And we did a disservice to the entrepreneur to bring them along that far without letting them know.
Jo Ann. So I just want to give a plug to the Knowledge Institute, because having gone through a bunch of deals to those points, every once in a while I'll go back and read the documentation and the checklist, which highlight sort of all the things we should be thinking about as a deal lead and how to really help people who are on your deal team. And that helps, I think, bring to bear the first meeting or two of what the bumps should be. Like what get them out there may not be resolved, but the documentation from the Knowledge Institute and one-on-one is terrific and really helps that.
Yeah, that's in the deep dive. It's nice to be able to think that you've articulated the things that are potential deal breakers so that you can work on those. And that's always what you walk out of the deep dive with. But the thing is that as you go on, other things that are potential deal breakers come up. And I agree with Loretta, sometimes you don't address them right away because maybe it's something you can deal with, maybe you need the other momentum around the deal to deal with it, or maybe somebody else is going to kill it before you even have to worry about that one. But yeah, that is a problem.
This is, I think, our last question. Great. One question I have is, having been in a deal, we didn't have a lot of investors early on. Again, primarily, most of us go with the deal because we're backing the entrepreneur. But I don't know how we could have learned this in due diligence or if it's come up before. But right after we funded it, the CEO couldn't afford to do this anymore. So she did her job. And talked about, but I don't know what lessons learned, what could we have done. We don't ask for financials, I don't think, of the CEO. How could we have learned from this, and if you experienced this before?
Well, we do a background check. So if we see that somebody has a gigantic, $6 million mortgage or they've been bankrupt before, we would know that. I actually sort of think that maybe that's a character flaw, that somebody should be, if somebody is trying to raise money from somebody, there has to be a commitment from the entrepreneur that they're going to stay. But I also do think it's, something that you have to think about. How much money does it take for somebody to live? And, it is different with a lot of the entrepreneurs that we see because they tend to be older people with more responsibilities. They're not living in a shoebox in Bed-Stuy. So I do think that's something that we have to address. But certainly that's atypical. Thank heavens, most of the entrepreneurs are totally committed. But
yeah, obviously, sometimes some things come up and you can't anticipate them. But I think the main thing to do is to have such a relationship with the entrepreneur that you hear all the things that don't get written down. You really have to know the entrepreneur pretty well. And over a 6 or 8 week process or 10 weeks, if you listen very carefully, you can figure out what their mindset is. But maybe she just, obviously you have bad apples, and if she just either did it sort of precipitately at the end of raising the money, or she just kept it all secret, then there's nothing to do about that.
I think particularly because Group Eyes was a husband-wife deal, which created a lot of issues for many people, that we talked about everything. I knew how much the wife was making at her current job and that what we were offering. He hadn't been taking a salary for the last 2 years. What we were offering for the two of them combined was less than what she was making in her current position. But we talked, they have 2 kids, we talked about what their financial situation was. I mean, we really went into a lot of this because he'd already been going 2 years without a salary. So again, they could have kept all of this from me, but between the background checks and being very open and honest about everything that was going on, and could they afford to live in their house with this salary, and how long would that take? One of the reasons why, which he told me after the fact, we were originally raising $1.5 million. We were able to raise 2. We actually probably could have raised 2.5 or 3. But one of the reasons they decided to take the dilution and go for the 2 is because both of their careers and both of their salaries are on the line with this, and having a little bit more cushion so that they knew for the next year, year and a half, they were going to be able to afford to do this, made it very easy for them to take the dilution.
I think that's why it's very difficult to invest in boyfriend and girlfriend, those, because they can't tell you what's going to happen. So you have, and so it's just very difficult to make any kind of decision.
Clearly, this could go on for a lot longer. Jo Ann, Gail, Vicki, and Emily, thank you for a really great session. Thank you. And we'll take a 5-minute break, so we'll start in a few more minutes. Thank you again.